Subscriptions, thumbs, and notifications are a major force in video production. Please press the subscribe button in the lower right.
These people have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
You shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
On November 22, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated during a visit to Dallas, Texas. In 1964, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone and that there was no solid evidence that he was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate the president. The committee is also then Secretary of State Rusk, Secretary of Defense Robert S. McNamara, Treasury Secretary C. Douglas Dillon, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, and Director J. Edgar of the CIA John A. McCone, Hussein, and James Rowley. However, 57 years after Kennedy's assassination, countless assassination backgrounds and conspiracy theories continue. Now, scrutinizing the social and political situation of the time, we dig through the plot of Kennedy's assassination. The Kennedy family is a prestigious political family that has long stood out in politics, public interest, entertainment, and business in the United States. 35 years after his family arrived from Ireland, Patrick Joseph, P.J. Kennedy served in the Massachusetts State Council from 1884 to 1895. The grandson, John F. Kennedy, started in 1947, and every year, at least one Kennedy family worked at the federal election office. Kennedy became a congressman in Massachusetts by 2011. P.J. Kennedy's great-grandson Patrick J. Kennedy had retired from Rhode Island to the House of Representatives for 64 years. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., son of Patrick Joseph Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, who became president between his wife Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, who served as Attorney General for other members of the House of Representatives or Senate, to U.S. ambassadors, 1 deputy governor, 3 state lawmakers, 1 mayor. In addition, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Eunice Kennedy Shriver, the daughter of his wife Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, founded the National Institute of Health and created a Special Olympics. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, daughter of Eunice, worked as California's First Lady. Joseph and Rose Kennedy's other offspring are physical, intellectual challenge on behalf of people who have been as a writer, activist, and lawyer. The reputation of a prestigious family was followed by a curse rumor. In 1941, Rosemary received a non-consensual lobotomy to treat her mental disorder and suppress uncontrollable behavior for the rest of her life. Joseph Jr. died in 1944 when a Navy bomber exploded during a flight, and Kathleen died in a plane crash in France in 1948. John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy were killed in 1963 and 1968, and Ted was nearly killed when his plane crashed in Massachusetts, Southampton, and in Apple Orchard, and legislative aide Edward Moss, and a pilot died in the crash. Ted suffered severe back injuries, punctures in the lungs, fractured ribs, and later recovered from internal bleeding for months at the hospital. In later generations, David died of an overdose of drugs in 1984, Michali died of injuries caused by a ski accident in 1997, John Jr. died of a plane crash off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in 1999. Cara and Christopher died of heart failure in 2011 and 2018, respectively, and Sanders died of multiple drug and overdose in 2019. In April 2020, Robert's granddaughter, Marv Kennedy Townsend McQueen, an Obama administration official, and her 8-year-old son, Gideon Joseph Kennedy McKean, were missing from Chesapeake Bay after getting in a canoe to retrieve the ball. They were presumed dead after not being found within 26 hours. Miguel and Gideon's bodies have since been recovered. In 1960, in the presidential election, Kennedy managed to win over Republican candidate Nixon. During the campaign, Kennedy said, "I will free Cuba from communist oppression." Kennedy made this promise to shed his image as Democratic Party weak. Kennedy's father, who was deeply involved in organized crime, moved the Mafia in Chicago, allowing Kennedy to win in Illinois, where he had a large electoral district. The powerful U.S. military command thought the young president, John F. Kennedy, was as weak as his father, who advocated appeasement against the Nazis. Hardline lead Joint Chiefs of Staff openly ignored orders from the young president and Robert McNamara, a former Ford Auto executive. The CIA, like Eisenhower, had Alan Welch Dulles kept his position as director. The Kennedy brothers were not in control of the military. CIA, FBI. President Kennedy approved the CIA plan to invade Cuba. On April 17, 1961, the Cuban anti-communist army led by CIA landed in the Bay of Pigs, Cuba, but was pushed back by Cuban resistance, but the waiting U.S. Air Force did not come to provide support. According to recently released data, Kennedy refused an airstrike order, and the invading forces were killed or taken prisoner. In July 1961, General Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, briefed the Kennedy brothers on their war plans to preemptive strikes against the Soviet Union with nuclear missiles. Lemnitzer treated the president as if he were a student.
In December 1964, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara of Cuba visited the UN headquarters in New York in uniform. The Kennedy brothers looked at them with intellectual curiosity. The military and conservatives were angry at Kennedy's reaction. Kennedy dismissed CIA Director Alan Dulles and Deputy Director Vissel as a reprimand for the Bay of Pigs invasion. You can imagine how those with thick bones in CIA, including Richard McGarry-Helms, who later became director of CIA, might have seen the Kennedy brothers. Kennedy then replaced Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who openly ignored the president and appointed scholarly Captain Maxwell Taylor as his successor. The Mafia was feeling betrayed by Robert Kennedy. Robert's father, a friend of the Mafia, was especially so because his brother was elected president thanks to the Mafia. Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, smuggled alcohol in during the week. Joe Kennedy was a drug trafficker, brought alcohol to Canada through legal means, where others crossed the U.S. border, illegally took it. It brought him into contact with Al Capone and the Mafia. When JFK ran for president, Joe was helped by the Mafia to turn the states upside down for JFK, especially for Illinois and Chicago. It was thanks to Joseph Kennedy's Mafia connection that led the JFK to the White House. With the election imminent, the Mafia could claim credit for reversing the difference. John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, or Mafia fighting, they sought revenge for betrayal and conspired his death. Another reason why the Mafia was angry with the Kennedy brothers was that the Mafia invested heavily in recreational facilities such as hotels and casinos in Cuba, and was taken away by Castro. The Mafia wanted President Kennedy to invade Cuba and find their property, but it returned to nothing. This was the same position as the U.S. military, CIA, and Mafia. Another problem Kennedy faced was Vietnam. There is a lot of debate about whether Kennedy would have approached Vietnam differently than Johnson. Recent data showed Kennedy's sincerity was in the withdrawal. Kennedy intended to withdraw 1,000 military advisors in late 1963, win the presidential election in 1964, and completely withdraw. The military and CIA strongly protested the White House move. White voters in the South were angry about Kennedy's liberal policies. Kennedy could not guarantee re-election if he lost Texas, which had a lot of electoral votes. That's why he decided to visit Dallas and drove him to his death. Visiting Dallas, which was hostile to Kennedy, and having an open-air parade downtown. It was a reckless decision itself. Kennedy, on November 22nd, was shot at the Delay Plaza corner while traveling through the city in an open car. The Kennedy Assassination Commission, Warren Commission, concluded that there was no solid evidence that Oswald acted alone and was involved in a plot to assassinate the president. However, the situation, which is not explained by Oswald's solo crime, has fostered conspiracy theories.
To the basement of police headquarters.
1. Lee Harvey Oswald said, "I am a scapegoat," and is killed by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner who is a member of a Mafia, in a prison in a police station. 2. Lee Harvey Oswald's wife testified that her husband had always admired President Kennedy, and that the target of the assassination was Governor Connally. By the Green Notebook's death list from the search for an apartment in Oswald, James Patrick Hosty, an FBI agent who was plagued by his wife's immigration problems, Conservative Generals Edwin Walker, Vice President Richard Nixon, and Texas Governor John Connally.
She's given 3 different versions. Which one do you want?
3. FBI Director John Edgar Hoover and President Kennedy are at their worst relationship, assassinated Kennedy for fear of being dismissed. 4. The CIA hated Kennedy, who was critical of the CIA's policy of supporting the anti-communist right in the Third World or Western Europe. 5. Mafia tried to take revenge on John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, who were devoted to Mafia fighting, considering Mafia's relationship with President Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy. Mafia invested heavily in entertainment facilities, like hotel, casino in Cuba, but was taken away by Castro, and angered by President Kennedy's abandonment of the invasion of Cuba. 6. Oswald's Italian-made 6.5 caliber Mannlicher-Carcano rifle, used to assassinate President Kennedy. Experts say it is difficult firing 3 shots in a few seconds with this kind of $21.45 rifle. 7. Witnesses testified that the gunshot rang 4 times and flew from front tube. In early 1967, federal prosecutor Jim Garrison in New Orleans announced that he was reinvestigating Kennedy's assassination. Kennedy was victimized by a conspiracy that starting in New Orleans, Jim Garrison said, Oswald is an agent trained by the CIA to get rid of Castro and only dressed up as a communist to make the Kennedy assassination appear to be a Cuban act. Robert Kennedy sent a colleague from Justice Department, Walt Sheridan, to dig into Jim Garrison's background and find out that he had something to do with the New Orleans Mafia. Jim Garrison's unreasonable investigation has wiped out public opinion that Kennedy's assassination should be investigated again. Robert Kennedy, speaking to supporters at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles on June 5, 1968, was shot by a 24-year-old Palestinian named Sirhan Sirhan. He was taken to a hospital but died the next day. In June 1975, Chicago's Mafia godfather, Sam Giancana, who was due to testify before a Senate investigation committee, was killed. In July 1976, Johnny Roselli, known as a broker between the CIA and the Mafia, was found in Miami as a disastrous body ahead of the summons. The two were thought to have been killed by Miami's godfather, Santo Trafficante. With the death of the two, congressional investigations have been dashed. In the 1990s, people suspected of being involved in the Kennedy assassination died one by one. Former CIA Director Richard Helms, James Angleton, and other senior officials who served as director and deputy director did not speak until their deaths. However, David Phillips, who had ties to the anti-communist Cuba army, told his family before his death in 1988 that he was in Dallas the day President Kennedy was assassinated. Howard Hunt, who participated in the Bay of Pigs invasion, left an oral statement before his death in early 2007, saying the assassination of Kennedy was carried out by the CIA and a second assassin was ahead. Hunt, who retired from the CIA in 1970, was hired by the White House Secret Service and was found breaking into the Watergate building, where the Democratic campaign headquarters were located. In CIA, he helped violently eliminate the legally elected left-wing president in Guatemala and helped the Che Guevara murder squad. At that time, the U.S. media did not actively follow up on the Kennedy assassination because CIA executives were almost Yale University and prestigious loan sharks and had connections with media executives. After Robert Kennedy's assassination, Kennedy's widow, Jacqueline Kennedy, and the rest of the family, they themselves, feared at the risk of assassination. It's true that all these circumstances weigh on the Mafia-CIA connection, but the Warren Commission ends with an Oswald single-handed offender. Is the conspiracy theory of the criminal group, Mafia and intelligence agency CIA, which the world's #1 U.S. president, can also be removed by conspiracy, groundless?